Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beneath the Silence, Healing the Wounds of Betrayal Trauma. I want to thank all those who have watched my podcasts in the past and are now watching today's podcast. And welcome to new people who are just joining. And I hope you find something out of these podcasts that aids in your healing journey or your information or even makes you feel less alone. That's the goal. As a reminder, these podcasts are not edited, they're real, raw, and vulnerable, and definitely not perfect. And it's to help those who are listening to realize that they don't have to be perfect either. And it's just like we're talking as if we're having a cup of tea over the kitchen table and having this discussion, and I'm giving you some information. Please feel free to reach out to me at my website, sandrajoy.ca, anytime. If you have any questions or if there's anything that you would like me to talk about in relation to betrayal trauma, in any way, shape, or form. And that includes more about actual trauma, or I am going to do a podcast on coercive control versus covert control in the future. There's lots of things planned over the next year. But anyway, welcome to today's podcast. So before we get into it, it's on cultural betrayal trauma. Before we get into it, just going to recap the family betrayal trauma. And you can have family betrayal trauma and cultural betrayal trauma at the same time. They do they can be parallel and they can intersect and they can compound one another, right? So today is as we grow inside cultures, communities, traditions, and identities, they are supposed to give us the sense of belonging and safety. But what happens when those very cultures deny, minimize, or even enable harm? Today, we're diving into cultural betrayal trauma, how it happens, why it is often hidden, just like all the other betrayal traumas, hence getting beneath the silence, and what healing can look like when the culture we trusted turns its back on us. Okay? So I'm going to start again with research as I usually do. And this research is coined and expanded in part by Dr. Jennifer Fried's work on betrayal trauma theory. But this work is by Gomez in 2018, and she did it to include cultural betrayal and cultural betrayal trauma theory. So her definition of cultural betrayal trauma theory is when the perpetrator belongs to the same minority group as the survivor. It adds an additional layer of trauma on the survivor. And by Gomez and Fried in 2019, when betrayal trauma theory addresses breaches in trust in interpersonal relationships, cultural betrayal trauma theory posits a violation of trust, and that trauma arises from the breach of this inherent trust within a group, intercultural trust, and that trust acts as a cushion against societal disparities. So think of marginalized populations, race, um, sexuality, gender, poverty. I mean, there's many marginalized groups. And when we think of those groups, we feel safe within those groups of others who are experiencing similar things from what someone may experience in society. But where cultural betrayal trauma theory comes into play is within that same group, there is more betrayal. against other members of that group. Okay. So Gomez in 2018 says when betrayal occurs within group of a marginalized population, it inflicts a deeper level of harm compared to betrayal within a majority population group or from a different minority group. Okay. So I am going to give you an example about a whistleblower in a population group, but I'm going to give that in just a few moments. So what all this means, what cultural betrayal trauma means is that this is harm that occurs within a cultural group uh, and a person who identifies within that group. So whether ethnic, racial, national, community-based, for example, policing, and they become a whistleblower. Or there is some untoward things happening within the group, and there's someone who wants to report it and are seemingly removed from the group, not necessarily physically, but other people in the group will not have anything to do with them. Okay? It's betrayal. It's cultural betrayal. And it's often magnified by shared history, oppression, and identity, how we identify. So some examples of cultural betrayal, it's racism or discrimination with one's own racial or ethnic group. Okay. Grifters in government. Maybe they're in a religious component or an ethnicity or a certain race. And rather than helping their own race, they go against their race in order to be accepted by the majority, usually white people. Okay. Sexual or physical abuse covered up to protect the community image. Silence or victim blaming to preserve cultural cohesion. So, victim blaming, think of Darvo. Okay. Gaslighting survivors to maintain public perception. So, this can happen in a family. This can happen um, like I said, community-based examples. So it can be in a nonprofit for all those who are in the nonprofit organization, in policing or other first responders, in military. I mean, it's in a college or university. It can happen in all kinds of different areas. Okay. So why is it uniquely damaging? So culture is often a source of safety, pride, and belonging. These are my people. These are the ones that, it's the bros in blue for policing, or bros or sis in blue for policing. It's in the LGBTQ community. It's, to have that sense of safety and cohesiveness and belonging, and yet maybe there's sexual abuse that's been happening. Betrayal threatens both personal identity and group identity. Okay. Victims may feel torn between loyalty to culture and loyalty to self, what one's own ethics are or morality is. Isolation from both inside and outside the group. So when there's cultural betrayal, there's isolation inside the group, but also outside the group. Who is safe? Nobody is safe, not within the group and not without of the group. So what are the signs and impacts of this? There's confusion about identity and belonging. There's feelings of abandonment and cultural exile. There's intensified shame. So we already have shame due to the internalization of betrayal trauma. So now when you add the cultural aspect, there's intensified shame because we are maybe betraying the feel of betraying the group by speaking out. It's difficulty trusting other communities or systems. And the barriers to speaking out is fear of being ostracized and labeled a traitor and pushed out of the group, of the culture. It's concern over reinforcing stereotypes against the group. It's lack of cultural competent support systems. I mean, that one's huge. That's has to do with institutionalized betrayal, not having these support systems in place. So, how do we heal? What do we do? Again, it's comes with addressing, naming, and acknowledging the harm while honoring one's own cultural identity, whatever that cultural identity is. It's seeking support from safe, understanding individuals within the culture or building external support networks if necessary. Therapy, of course, I'm huge, of course, in being in the field. Approaches that integrate cultural sensitivity and trauma recovery. So ask your therapist, do they support cultural sensitivity? If someone asked me that, I would ask questions about their culture. I may not be a part of their culture and understand. And my role is not to ask my client to teach me about their culture, is that I will promise my client I will learn about their culture and I will do research. I may ask clarifying questions of how their culture and this reporting impacts them to so I can have a greater understanding of the impact on the client, but not for the client to teach me about their culture. Hopefully that makes sense for you. It's engaging in cultural, like reclaiming your culture, reclamation. It's redefining what aspects of your culture you choose to carry forward. What does that look like for you? Okay. So I'm gonna read to you this case study. It's just where all the description of the podcast is. There is a link to this case study. It was written by Farhang in 2019, and it's called Andrea Heath's Desert Hot Springs Detectives Whistleblowers First Amendment Case in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So this was out of the United States. And so I'm going to give you this case study just so you have an understanding of what cultural betrayal may look like when this is having to do with policing. So Andrea was a 45-year-old woman who retired early from her job as a city police officer. Throughout more than a decade in her career, in her department, Andrea saw numerous colleagues falsely arrest, beat, tase, pepper spray, and otherwise torture detainees and arrestees. I want to argue that what's happening in the States right now under ICE, there are people that work that are ICE officers and are witnessing this stuff, but are fearful for their own life and fearful for what will happen if they speak. And yet we've got to hold strong to values and what that looks like. It's why there has been in the United States hundreds upon hundreds of FBI, workers, detectives who have left the job. How many lawyers that have left, you know, the they have been prosecutors and have left that field. They're still lawyers, but have left the field because of what is happening in the United States. So there's cultural betrayal in many aspects, but it's also institutionalized betrayal, what's happening in the States. And that's a couple of podcasts away. Okay. So after years of witnessing the behavior, feeling as though her ethics had been compromised. Do you remember when I talked about moral injury? This is part of the moral injury and betrayal trauma that she witnessed and then will experience the cultural betrayal. Her feelings that her ethics had been compromised by standing by and watching. She decided she had to do something. She decided to reach out to the FBI and report the behaviors of the police because she didn't trust her superior, who was also involved. So that's why she went to the FBI. And she was told by the FBI that they were already investigating the department for suspected unethical behavior as police officers. However, the colleagues in her department found out about her reports to the FBI, resulting in them harassing her, calling her a rat, refusing to back her up on dangerous calls, therefore putting her life at risk, and intimidating her under threat of violence to keep her mouth shut. Furthermore, Andrea was assigned to patrol cars that wouldn't start and that their computers had been removed. She also suspected that someone had been tampering with her office computer, possibly to see if she was making any more reports to the FBI. During this time, Andrea had to take various medical leaves of absences because of the stress of the cultural betrayal. After being on the police force for 16 years, upon returning from a medical leave, Andrea was demoted to trainee status by upper management, which she felt was in retaliation for her report to the FBI. The officer she was assigned to work with yelled at her in front of suspects and made her handle high-risk calls by herself. Andrea felt that the work environment was unsafe, hostile, a form of retaliation, and was getting worse as each day went on. Andrea continued as a trainee between her various medical leaves until she was forced to retire as further retaliation for her report to the FBI. However, the police chief claimed that the demotion was a story of a poorly performing employee who the city made every effort to train and bring up to standards, and who, after extensive leaves of absences, was found not fit for duty and retired on disability. A year after Andrea's retirement, she decided to sue the city and several of its officers, claiming wrongful termination and a violation of her First Amendment rights. However, the judge eventually dismissed her case, arguing that her claims had no merit and were filed too late after the events transpired. This is an example of institutionalized betrayal. After receiving the verdict from the judge, Andrea made an appeal. Due to her years of suffering and torment from those who were her colleagues and superiors, as well as being unsupported by the legal system, Andrea felt there was no hope, and she later took her own life. This is an example, a harsh example of being a whistleblower and lack of support and the culture banding together to do everything in their power to get this whistleblower, this problem out. There is betrayal blindness in here. There's betrayal trauma from individual superiors. There is the cultural betrayal that's in here. Obviously, complex trauma, many medical leaves, and she felt she had no hope and nowhere to go. This is I don't want to say extreme example. It is extreme because she ended up taking her life because she felt no hope. Cultural betrayal trauma is that added layer on top of betrayal trauma, because wherever there's cultural betrayal, there is individual betrayal trauma. And most often there's betrayal blindness, and that can be the bystander blindness. Think of the Emperor's New Coat. They don't want what happened to Andrea to happen to them, so they can't risk it. They can't risk speaking out. And yet, we need people to speak out. We need to call it what it is. And I also can understand the difficulty of that. So what did we learn today? That betrayal trauma sucks, that it's hard, that it infiltrates every area of our lives. It can be in the workplace, whether that's a separate culture or not. I mean, every workplace is a culture on its own for those that don't work in that place. Okay. So cultural betrayal trauma occurs when harm is committed by members or leaders of one's own cultural group, often compounding the pain of the abuse itself. Survivors can feel trapped between protecting the culture and protecting themselves. Healing involves reclaiming agency, deciding which parts of one cultural identity to keep and which to relieve. My next podcast will be on religious betrayal trauma and how they can all, betrayal trauma, cultural betrayal, religious betrayal, and then institutionalized betrayal, which will be after religious. So religious betrayal is when faith is used as a weapon, but how they can all intersect, and that you won't have cultural, religious, family, or institutional without individual betrayal. And as always, I want to thank you for joining me today in Beneath the Silence, Healing the Wounds of Betrayal Trauma. Remember that healing is possible, even when it is from the deepest wounds, such as cultural betrayal. For more resources and information about my betrayal trauma course, please visit my website at sandrajoy.ca. And please, again, if you are able to subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share the podcasts, whether that's from Spotify, leave a review. I really appreciate all of those things if you could do that. Again, it helps with the algorithms. And when you share the podcasts, you are helping others to learn and find community and not feel so alone. And while that's not your responsibility, it is wonderful if you can do that. And until next time, take gentle care of yourself. And remember, I see you, I hear you, and I believe you. Thank you. Until we meet again.